So last week's discussion, we talked a lot about sincerity and also to a degree some self-responsibility to develop sincerity, didn't we? Like what's involved with that. And you can see from our discussion last week that if we don't know where we're at in our progression, it's very easy to be completely insincere while at the same time believing yourself to be quite sincere. It's a very interesting thing, sincerity, when it's measured from God's perspective rather than our own. God's laws have much higher standards for our sincerity than we have for ourselves. And that is where most people struggle to receive God's love, because they are working by their own standards rather than by God's standards. And also, for the most part, not even interested in finding out what God's standards actually are. Because God's standards are going to be based on laws, and those laws are going to be consistent and definite, and they're not going to be malleable, and they're not going to change. So for many of us, the way we view as a relationship, as we discussed a little last week, we sort of view a relationship like a series of compromises. You know, I compromise on this and you compromise on that, and then we can have a relationship. But obviously from God's perspective, he wants a relationship, but he wants it to be real as he defines what real is. And that is very different to what we define a real relationship is. And this is where, for the majority of us, this is where our prayer has problems. Because our prayer is frequently, we're thinking we're being sincere, but often we're just acting in an addiction, or more commonly, being sincere in our tantrum. We're just having a tantrum, and we're expressing the tantrum to God, but actually, and we're quite sincere in our tantrum in the fact that we believe that our tantrum is justified, just like a little child who didn't get a lolly in the store believes his tantrum is justified. But obviously not being completely sincere about why we are responding the way we are. And this is something that if we don't address, then our relationship with God is not going to grow. So I wondered whether you guys had any questions about last week's discussion based upon what you heard last week. Did any of you listen to it again? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And whether you had any questions about the discussion in terms of about developing sincerity. How do you do that when you already believe yourself to be sincere in particular? How do you go about developing sincerity as God would measure it rather than how we would measure it? Is the real question. So if any of you have any questions about that, I'd like to answer them now, and then we can proceed with the developing discussion a bit further. Ronnie?
A thought popped up this week for me about, because I know on certain subjects, pretty much on every subject I'm sincere, but is it a matter of each thing that comes up for you, you've got to work through that process of being sincere? Or is it, is there an overall thing where you can work on your faith as an overall kind of blanket thing, or is it literally to every subject that you've got to work through your fear and your faith, humility?
Well, it's a good question. You were basically saying, is there a global thing we can do to overcome our sort of lack of sincerity? Or is our sincerity more to do with each individual thing we might have to address? Right. So that's a good question. During our childhoods, the majority of us have been taught, and actually taught very rigidly, to become insincere in our dealings with others. Now, you can see in the way children are brought up, for the most part, insincerity is often encouraged. And we gave an example of that last week, remember, of where a child is asked to say sorry, and as long as the parent just hears sorry from the child, they're not measuring the child's sincerity about whether they're really sorry or not. They're just saying, just say sorry. because they want the illusion of their child being sorry, but they don't really care about the substance of the child actually feeling sorry. And then once the child is rewarded for that behaviour, which most children are, by the time the child's become an adult, it now feels that it can give the illusion of a feeling rather than the feeling, the real feeling, and other people should accept the illusion rather than saying, actually, you're not being truthful now. Right? So by the time we're adults, we are expecting to be able to give an illusion to the people around us, and we're expecting that they accept it. And we're expecting that if they don't accept it, that they're the bad person. Right? If they don't accept our illusion, we feel that they're being, inconsiderate or unkind by not accepting the illusion that we are portraying. And it can get so bad that we actually have lived the illusion for so long that we actually think the illusion is actually sincere. That's how bad that can get. It can get to the stage where we believe the way in which we be ourselves, if we could put ourselves in quotation marks for all those who can't see my comments, and if we be ourselves, then for most of us we believe what we've become as an adult is ourselves. And actually for the majority of the cases, that's not true at all. We've learnt to present the illusion of ourselves, and we have even come to accept the illusion as if it's real. And that becomes very difficult now for us to be able to determine when we are sincere, even for ourselves, to determine that for ourselves. And it's a big problem in terms of how we're brought up as children, and the illusion that then is created as an adult, that we are being nice and kind, and we're being considerate of others, and we're being, loving towards others, and yet all of it, for the most part, has been trained into us as children to present the illusion of all of those things rather than the reality of it all. So this is why when most people on earth pass into the spirit world, they don't pass into the 6th or 7th sphere or in some area that's highly developed in love, because they have bought into their own illusion, and they pass expecting to be, if they believe in the spirit world at all, they expect to be passing into a good state, only to find themselves usually quite deep in the hells in the first sphere. And the environment is now saying to them, this is where you deserve to be, given the condition of love that you're exhibiting. And the person is going, how did this happen? And they're totally surprised. And it's very interesting when you spend time welcoming people into the spirit world, because the amount of people, when you have to take them to the place where they actually are going to live for the first part of their life in the spirit world, the majority of people are absolutely shocked about the conditions. Like, absolutely shocked. For many, it's like for many of you living in your comfortable homes now and then being ushered into a rubbish dump in the spirit world. And that's where you've got to live. Right? That's how shocked most people find themselves when they pass. It's very rare that a person is actually accurately assessed where they will pass and actually expected to be there. Ironically, the people who are often quite self-determined to be evil do expect, if there is a spirit world, that they will be in those locations. So often they are the persons who are least shocked, right? And the people on earth who believe themselves to be good and kind and considerate and everything and loving, often they are the people who are most shocked. And quite often those people who believe themselves to be good and kind and considerate and loving are religious people, right? And so oftentimes it's the religious people who are the most shocked, because they have lived a life seemingly on the outside in agreement with the principles that they might have learnt from a holy book like the Bible or the Quran or something like that. but internally they've never really agreed with it. Never really sincerely agreed with it inside of themselves. And frequently they are the people who are most shocked about their passing. So it is often also the case that the people in the West are more shocked than the people in third world countries. And there's many good reasons for that. And one good reason is that many of us in the West are used to getting what we want, when we want it, how we want it, without any consideration of the ramifications of that on others. But people in the third world frequently are struggling to even just survive. And so when they enter the spirit world and are still struggling to survive, or that's the feeling they have, it's no different. But when a person from the first world enters the spirit world and now is struggling, for him or her it is very different. And so there is often this large contrast that occurs. And when you're one of the people welcoming them and taking them to the location where they'll eventually live for at least a short period of time until their condition of love improves, you're the one who has to deal with the level of shock they're in to a degree. Yeah. So the real then question becomes, as Rani asked, are there individual things where I'm demonstrating at least some sincerity? Or is there generally a flavour of insincerity about almost everything? And and how do I deal with one or the other things if one or the other things are true? Now, the thing to bear in mind is that each person is an individual. So that's the first thing we need to remember when we're answering questions like this. Each individual has had their own upbringing and their own way of dealing things based upon a combination of their upbringing, their circumstances and their personality, the way in which they dealt with those events of their childhood. And of course, for each person, those things will be different. So how you deal with the issue of sincerity is going to be different. Right? However, it can be said generally that on earth, the majority of us have been taught, and this applies third world or first world, the majority of us have been taught to present an illusion to others under certain circumstances. And we've learnt to do this, the majority of us have learnt to do this, without any consideration of the ethics or morality of doing it. We've believed it's doing the right thing, even though we haven't felt the right thing. And many of us have the approach to life that, I do feel like doing this unloving thing, but I'll control myself from doing that unloving thing, and I'll do the right thing instead. And if you think about most religious movements, the basic tenets are encouraging that. Where they're basically saying, you're all sinners. So, in other words, you're all bad people fundamentally, is really what the underlying presentation is. And what you've got to do is try to be better, right? Without actually being better, without actually feeling inside better. We've got to try to be better. And this creates this separation between what is really going on in our soul compared to what we think we feel in our mind. So there's a huge separation between those two states. And because there is that huge separation, sincerity now becomes very difficult as God measures it, because he's measuring what's going on in the soul. And that's the only thing his laws measure. Right? To God, you are a soul, not a body. Your body is like, what did we say in one group? It was like a sleeve, a flesh suit, right? In the case of a flesh body. And the spirit body is really a spirit suit, if you like, which is controlled by the soul. So, if the soul is the thing we're ignoring, and we're focusing our attention on how things look and how we're presenting everything, can you see what we're doing internally to ourselves is separating ourselves from any point of sincerity as God would measure it. We're creating a gulf between the real condition of our soul and what our condition actually is now, what we believe it to be. If my approach to growth, what I believe to be growth, is to try harder, and how many of you, since I've met you, have had that view? Well, just try harder and everything will work, right? For almost everyone, right? So if our approach is to try harder, that is basically evidence that we still don't understand that the soul has to change, right, somehow. And understanding how the soul changes is not necessarily about trying harder, right? There's things that are in the soul that have got to come out of it. And if you try hard to overcome them, you're really trying hard to suppress them. So they are going to stay there. They are going to stay inside of the soul. Those things that you're trying hard to overcome will remain there. The only way you can really overcome something is by it being released from your soul. So it no longer being in your soul. And when it's no longer in your soul, you don't have to try hard to overcome it anymore. Right? In fact, it's just a natural process where you overcome it naturally. As a result of it being gone from the soul, it is now gone from anything you would choose to do with your behaviour as a result. So every problem that we approach generally when it comes to self-improvement, if we can call it self-improvement, because we remember Divine Truth is not a self-improvement program. It's a God relationship program. Understand? So, but when it comes to self-improvement with anything else we've tried, and this applies also all the way through our childhood. You remember when you first went to school, you had to learn your times tables. Did you learn them in your soul? No, it wasn't anything to do with the soul involved with it, was it? It was all rote, reply, remember. It was all about intellectual responses, wasn't it? And if you look at the way we're educated as children, even now, for the most part, it's all about developing the intellect, developing the mind. So we are taught all the way through our childhood, not only by our parents who want us to sort of separate our life from our emotions, but also from society, all the way through our education process. The education process is basically saying to you, forget about what you feel about it, right? You got to learn this. Try harder. Put more effort in, you know. This is why, you know, when you think of education nowadays, you can see, you know, kids are given a lot of homework, aren't they? Particularly by the time they get into sort of Charlie's age, there's sort of lots of homework. Got to remember everything, got to read everything, got to reply the right way. And all this has done is distanced themselves from the soul and how it feels and what is really going on in it. Now, if you really loved maths, so how many of you have really done that in your life? Some of you? Yeah, very few actually really love it, right? But if you really love it, you like maths in your feelings, don't you? And so you don't have to remember everything. It sort of feels more natural. And it's like, now for many of you, you can relate when it comes to songs or music. If you really like music, does somebody have to force you to listen to it? No. Does somebody have to force you to learn how to play it? No. But if somebody sat you down at piano, like, you know, an hour a day, all of your childhood, by the time you get to your teenage life, how do you feel? You probably don't like it very much, right? For the most part. Either that or you're really good because you eventually learnt to like it because there's nothing else to like. But usually what happens is the average person gets very distant from their soul feelings about a thing. there are some parts of our life where distance from our soul feelings are less noticeable. When I say less noticeable, what I mean is there's some parts where we are inclined to the soul feeling, right? And so therefore have detuned less from it. An example of that is music, where most people are inclined towards the soul feeling, and so they're less detuned from music than they are in other areas of their life. But when it comes to something like maths, now the majority of people are quite detuned. Right? And so, in answer to the Rani's question, a lot of the times our detunement, there is a generalised, as you can see from that discussion, there is a generalised attitude of detunement in society. So this is why all of us have a generalised detunement from our true soul condition. There is also a generalised view that the way you progress is to just try harder to overcome, right? And that is also a generalised view of how to progress in anything, in any form of endeavour. So that is a general feeling the average society has, all society. You could say that is the general thing we're going to have to overcome when it comes to our sincerity. These attitudes that are being given to us, that are a part of our lives, and they've been a part of our lives all of our life, for the most part, about almost everything we do. Right? But then there's also going to be some areas where we are more detuned than average, and some areas where we're going to be less detuned than average, based upon what we had a soul affiliation towards at the time and what we were allowed to develop while being sincere in our childhood. And those things will be general, not general, in nature, but they will be specific in nature. And they are areas where we'll have to overcome our lack of sincerity in those specific areas as well. So all of us will have to overcome a lack of sincerity in these general areas. And then we will have individual to us and individual to our nature and our personality and individual to our experience, we'll have specific things that are going to be much worse than others and specific things that might be better than others. And this is why you've got to give up comparing yourself with another, because everything is so uniquely individual, and it's only by working through the uniquely individual problems that you'll eventually be refined, right? The general problems we'll all have to solve, the whole lot of us. And for the most part, we have quite a lot of them, right? Quite a lot of problems. Yeah, so you can see, in answer to the question Rani raised, you're going to have there's going to be things that are global in nature that are affecting your sincerity and that everybody else also has to deal with. And then there's going to be things specific to your own life, upbringing, choices that you're going to have to deal with that other people might not have to deal with. Yep. And both are going to be required to be dealt with in order for you to become sincere, as God measures sincerity. That answer your question? Yeah. That was it.
So